Hello, everyone. It's a brand new year, and God allowed us to see its beginning. I always wonder what a new year will bring. How about you? There's excitement in my heart for a new president, but I have a great concern this year for many whom God may call home, but who may not be saved, even though they're very sure they are. For that reason, I'm starting the new year off with this video. I believe we've been misled in regard to what salvation requires and just how many people will really be saved. So, let's begin 2025 with a new series called What's the Difference? And discuss the words Christian and real Christian today. Did you know there's a difference? I have a neighbor whom I love. She lost her husband 2 years ago and often tells me, quote, he's in a better place, end quote. She believes that simply because he was such a good, honest person. And he was. I liked him just as much as I like her. Then I have a high school friend who has told me her husband is so good that if he doesn't get to heaven, no one will. Both ladies are people who mean the world to me, but there isn't an ounce of saving faith in their lives, and they're totally unaware of it. They have no idea God says there is nothing good in any of us. And even if there was, that good would not get us to heaven. I've never known these two ladies to attend church or mention anything about God in depth. Yet, they firmly believe heaven is theirs because their requirement for heaven is being a good person. Unfortunately for all of us, we aren't the determiner of who does and does not get to heaven. That is up to God, and He's not the least bit interested in our requirements for heaven. So, what are God's requirements for heaven? Listen to these words of Jesus spoken in Mark chapter 10, verse 18, as well as in Luke chapter 18, verse 19. Jesus says, quote, no one is good except God alone, end quote. Again, no one is good. I didn't say that. Jesus did. So, does being good get anyone to heaven? The answer is a resounding no. Here's why. God is the only measure of good, and God is perfect. The only way we could ever be declared good is if we were perfect. But we're told in Romans chapter 3, verse 23 that, quote, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, end quote. What does all mean? It means that if good is the measure of getting to heaven, no one is or ever will be there. No one. Because none of us come close, even a little close, to God's perfection. We were born into Adam and Eve's original sin, and that will never leave us. Isaiah chapter 64, verse 6 says, by going even further, quote, all our righteous acts are like filthy rags in the eyes of a perfect God. So, when we think we are good and do good things, or when we think those we love are good because they do good things, Isaiah reminds us that all of that is simply a pile of filthy rags in God's eyes, and those rags will save no one. So, my two dear friends are among the many who absolutely believe they are saved when they are not. Now, let's talk about the people who call themselves Christian. Are they saved? How many people do you think are in that category and really believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, they're saved? Believe me, there are a great many. I once was one of them. If they're right, there are a tremendous number of people already in heaven, right? What, though, does Jesus say about that? In Matthew chapter 7, verse 14, Jesus says, quote, "Narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." What? Is Jesus really saying only a few people will be saved? That's exactly what he's saying. I never heard one thing about that in all my years in church. I had to read the entire Bible to discover that. Have you, who attend church regularly, ever heard any pastor or priest say that? I doubt you have. Well, is it true? Here's what Jesus says about that. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, he says, quote, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father in heaven." What? We have to do something to be saved? I thought we can't work our way to heaven. That is absolutely true. So, why is there a conflict? Truth is, we can't do 1 ounce of work to get ourselves to heaven, because our work is simply filthy rags to God. Let's clarify this then. We don't work for salvation, but we work because of it. And that work is required. I believe the words "I believe" are also required. But it's only step 1. If it never gets beyond the "I believe" stage, are we saved? Not according to Jesus, who says we have to do the will of his Father in heaven to be saved. We know we have to be baptized, but have we heard in church that our faith has to grow? Hebrews chapter 5 tells us Jesus became the source of salvation to all who obey him. And that chapter goes on to say that if religion for us stays in its infant stage, quote, "we are not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness," end quote. Which means people in religious infancy are not saved. So, is "I believe" enough to get us to heaven? No. We now know we have to do the will of God to be saved. What is that will? Go with me to Ephesians 2, verse 10, which says, "We are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works." Wait a minute. I thought good works are filthy rags. They are, if we do them our way. But Ephesians 10 says we are to do good works God's way. Read on to the end of verse 10. It says, We are to do the things God, quote, God prepared in advance for us to do, end quote. The only good works that matter are the ones He chose for us to do when He created us. Ephesians 4 tells us God equipped us to do those good works. He gave us everything we need to do the things He asks us to do and get busy doing it. Martin Luther failed us mightily, and because of his stance, the church continues to fail people by stopping at Ephesians 2:9, which says we are saved by grace, and not going on to verse 10. It is true that we are saved by grace, but we were created with talents to do the work God created for us to do, and we are required to do that work to show God and others we are saved by both our belief and our obedience. Why aren't pastors and priests telling us that? Answer: most have never read the whole Bible and teach us church doctrine they learned in seminary that was written by men rather than biblical truth. With all this new information you just heard, what's the difference then between a Christian and a real Christian? A Christian thinks they're saved because they're good people and believe Jesus died on the cross for their sins. Some even go to church every week, but they're not a real Christian. Real Christians believe, obey, and do the will of God by asking what His will for them is and then doing it. That's the narrow road to salvation. And as Jesus said, only a few are on that road because the faith of the majority is still in its infant, unsaved stage. Where are you then? Should you believe your pastor or priest who says all you need to do is believe in Jesus? Or should you and I believe Jesus, who says we need to do the will of His Father to be saved? Do you see the difference? Let's all get real. See you Thursday.